You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today I'm discussing AI with Ed Boulle, the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Orbital Witness. We were chatting, Ed, before we started recording. We could spend most of the rest of this week, never mind the rest of the next half an hour or so, talking about AI. So it could be quite an interesting discussion. Thanks very much indeed for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me, David. And yeah, we could absolutely talk about it a lot. In fact, I'm pretty much on a roadshow at the moment talking about AI and its implications for conveyancing. I was up in Leeds yesterday, the Legal Tech and Leeds event. We've got an event in Manchester tomorrow. So I find myself saying the same things about AI a lot. But yeah, this is a great opportunity to discuss.
You're relatively new to the residential conveyancing space. I think in the first instance, it would be useful for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do, and also tell us a bit about Orbital Witness as well.
Yeah, so for my own part, I started life as a lawyer. I qualified with a law degree. I then went on to qualify as a barrister. And then, probably much to the disappointment of my family, I ran away from the law. And actually, I went to work in tech, but very security. So I went to work in the space industry. I worked for the European Space Agency for a couple of years as a legal advisor to them, and that kind of got me into tech. I often get asked what the origin of the name of Orbital Witness is, and it's got its origins in the space sector. So the original idea that we kind of were exploring was using satellite imagery to see if people had been building stuff without planning permission. So that hence Orbital Witness. But that idea won us a place on a legal tech program run by a law firm in London called Mishcon de Reya, where they kind of took people from technology and put them in the real estate, in different departments of the law firm. In our case, they put us in the real estate department for several months. We watched lawyers carry out kind of due diligence on all manner of property transactions. And that's where really the origin of Orbital Witness lies. That's where we saw this kind of very paper-based, quite antiquated, often duplicative processes playing out, and kind of gave us this idea for using technology to automate a lot of the kind of the mundane tasks that sit behind property transactions.
This is going to sound a little flippant, Ed, and apologies for it, but there are a lot of providers out there. There's a lot of new startups in this space, aren't there? All talking about making the lives of conveyancers easier. You've got a bit of a track record already in commercial property, though.
Yeah.
Tell us about that and how that translates over into what you're doing in residential now.
Yeah, so we started in commercial property, essentially helping commercial property lawyers to assess diligence and reports on all manner of commercial property transactions. We absolutely recognize there are different operating models and different operating margins when it comes to residential conveyancing, but actually there are lots of parallels in the challenges that commercial property lawyers and residential conveyancing lawyers face. To name a few, they're both working on kind of fixed fee models with pressure on fees, increased workloads, increased pressure to deliver, increased regulatory burdens. There's quite a lot that they face in common, and fundamentally they're also doing a very similar task, which is reviewing and reporting on property and advising their client. Maybe this nature of the transaction is different, and in some cases the scale is different. But working in commercial property really first, which is where we've sort of been for the last 4 years until the start of this year, really allowed us to develop very sophisticated technology that we can now leverage to benefit conveyancing lawyers who are diligencing property. I think the other part of it as well is track record. As you said yourself, David, we're kind of new kids on the block, at least in the world of conveyancing. That we're new to this space, but we're used by 2,500 commercial property lawyers. We've been used on nearly 100,000 property transactions involving some million plus properties already. So whilst we aren't part of the, if you like, conveyancing establishment, even in technology provider sense, I think our track record in commercial property should provide some reassurance to conveyancing firms that, we have a decent idea what we're doing, we're credible, and we're able to deliver. We're
going to move on to AI in a second, but just in a nutshell, Ed, tell us about what Orbital Witness is about.
At the highest level, the vision of the business is to automate diligence for property transactions. What we really mean by that is building technology that can assist and automate what lawyers would otherwise do, the kind of paperwork bit of reviewing title searches and reporting on a property, and backing that up with insurance. In terms of residential conveyancing, our focus initially is on leasehold title checking and leasehold property transactions, as we've understood that for various reasons, that's a particularly hard to scale type of work. It's a particular challenge for conveyancing firms. So after sort of doing some discovery on what problems could we try and solve last year, that's where we've landed as our launch pad, if you like, for residential conveyancing.
So tell us about the leasehold title checking piece. That's using algorithms, and you're going to start losing me if you're not too careful, but it's using technology to read it, to report on it, to identify any potential risks or any potential need for further insurance.
Yes, I mean, just to set the scene a bit about the problem that we're solving, and then I'll talk a bit more about the product and the technology. You look at leasehold, there's kind of a perfect storm of a few different factors which make leasehold particularly hard to deliver at scale. So this is what the law firms are facing. First up, it's an increasingly complex field to navigate. I'm sure if I say the word Building Safety Act, it's very triggering. Regardless of that, if it's not that, it's been ground rent, it's been lender requirements, it's things all the time that are making it an increasingly complex type of transaction to do. Combine that with the fact that the experience needed is in increasingly short supply after so many experienced conveyancers went part-time or left the profession over the last few years.
Yeah, well documented.
Combine that with the fact that there is an increasing need and mandate to report properly and consistently coming from the Law Society, coming from lenders, coming from national trading standards and the upfront information movement. And, you wrap that all with the fact that it's hard in conveyancing, as I understand it, to increase prices to reflect that additional risk, that additional workload, the additional complexity. You have this kind of perfect storm. So what then the product does is it uses artificial intelligence and other technologies to automate and speed up one part of leasehold conveyancing process, which is reviewing the documents, identifying the issues. We can kind of commonly refer to as title checking and reporting on those issues.
Presumably what we're talking about here is leaseholds that are held in some sort of digital format. You're still not capable of reading the handwritten tomes that we're used to seeing or so used to seeing.
Every document that is sent to us by a customer, like for example a lease, we might get a more modern lease. That's the majority of them that are easily machine readable, if you like. And then of course there will be leases that have handwriting on them, and then there are leases from the 19th century that are entirely in manuscript. The technology that everybody uses to make these documents machine readable is OCR. So it's the ability to extract and digitize, if you like, digitize text from documents. We basically found that OCR performs as well as the human eye on handwriting and manuscript. That means in most cases it will pick up handwriting and it can identify it correctly. And then, as with most people, if you find some lease that's illegible scrawl, it won't perform very well, but neither would someone trying to read it.
Presumably, OCR is a fairly binary product. It can either read it or it can't. what part does AI start to play in what you're doing?
This is how the product works. Customers will send us documents from a contract pack that they need to review and report on. So, for example, in the context of a leasehold transaction, that might be the leasehold title, the lease itself, deeds of variation, a superior lease. We run those through our system. The first task in that system is to digitize those documents. That's the OCR piece. And then off the back of that, then we run that through an AI system that is trained to identify issues and answer questions about those documents, and also compare one document with another and reference documents to, for example, lender requirements. The core technology is in the artificial intelligence. OCR, it's nothing new, if you like. You can tweak it and refine it for legal documents, but the core technology is in the artificial intelligence. Now, just to unpack that a little bit, we use a generative AI system. Now, generative AI is obviously a word that a few months ago no one had ever heard, and now many of us are familiar with. So essentially, generative AI is a class of artificial intelligence that differentiates itself on the basis that it's able to generate new and seemingly original content. And that content can take a variety of forms. It could be images, music, it can be code, and of course it can be text or language. So it's a subset of artificial intelligence that has come on a great deal since 2017, 2018. And it's really come to the fore in about November of last year with a company called OpenAI, and when they released their large language model that everyone has heard of called ChatGPT, and it was version 3. Became the fastest ever growing app, reached 100 million users in 2 months, which was almost 5 times faster than TikTok. And how it all works under the hood is that it's predicting every single next word in the sentence, and it's just able to do that and perform amazingly well in answering complex questions, in reasoning, in multiple choice, because it's being trained on such a massive corpus of data. The key thing about it is that, and this is something that the founder of OpenAI has stressed, it's a reasoning engine. It's a tool for reasoning and not a fact database. A lot of people use ChatGPT to just ask a whole bunch of questions, a bit like they would a Google search engine. And in that realm, it can perform well, but there are definitely issues associated with that. What it is really should be used for, and what we're using it for, is to build systems and solutions that can reason with language, reason with text and document to answer particular questions. So like as a reasoning engine. So we're using this technology specifically for title checking leasehold title documents. That's what we fundamentally do. Once we take those documents, we digitize them, and then we answer questions about them. And what we do is we take standardized set of questions that a number of different law firms have created with us that correspond to kind of standard title checks, if you like, across different types of property. It could be shared ownership, retirement property, a flat, a house, doesn't matter. And we answer those questions using this generative AI. So that could be, for just give you a few examples there, simple questions like, what's the remaining term of this lease, through to more complex questions like, what are the forfeiture provisions in respect to breach of covenant, or under what conditions is subletting allowed in the lease, and cross-referencing what the lease says perhaps with what the lender requires. These are the tasks that a conveyancing lawyer would otherwise be required, right, in order to report back to both their kind of lay client and provide a certificate of title to a lender, a mortgage lender. So that's how we use the technology. But the technology in and of itself, and I kind of really want to stress this, is not the solution. It doesn't begin and end with artificial intelligence. Even the product itself is more than just AI. So we back our answers up with insurance as well. Insurance is just as much part of the product as the AI. In through that way, we can give complete reliance to customers. So that means they can use the information that we provide in their reporting process and provide it to their clients with full comfort that they've got something that they can rely on rather than something that they use at their own risk. And I think that's incredibly important, just sort of moving into this new world where lots of tasks can be carried out by machine. And then even if you look more broadly, if you kind of bird's eye view of the conundrum of leasehold transactions, our product is solving one part, one bottleneck, which is title checking and reporting. But for the industry to make this a scalable, successful part of the work composition, there are lots of other moving parts. There's the need for more upfront information. There's the need for the industry to stand up to the increasing demands that are being placed on them and ever-changing demands from lenders and regulators. That's my personal view on the matter. That is the industry willingness to charge a fair amount for the services they provide. So I don't want to be glib and suggest that our product or artificial technology is going to solve leasehold. It will make one part of the process that's hard to scale much, much easier to scale.
I suggested, Ed, that this could take most of the day, and I think you very succinctly explained your use of AI there. Thank you. And I say with my tongue in my cheek that having worked in a space agency, that you must be a rocket scientist to understand half of this stuff. Let me drill into this insurance piece, because that's long been mooted as one option to increase the speed of transactions in the UK, move into this almost this US model of using insurance as part of the transaction. You've talked about that as being a really critical part of what you do. Well, why do you feel like that?
We think about insurance in two ways. One is insurance as an enabler for a law firm to use and rely on a product. It's just a bit like PI, right? So the law firms have got their PI, their liability and their PI on the line when they're providing services to their clients. Their CLC regulated firms are obliged to provide $2 million as a minimum in cover, as I understand it. And we also know that from a study that the SRA conducted in 2016, that about 60% of all claims made against PI, law firms, PI insurers are transaction related, and over a quarter come from residential conveyancing. So a significant amount. And that means that if a law firm then wants to use a piece of technology or a product to carry out a part of its services, as far as we think, that law firm needs to be able to rely on that product or service. And I think for too long, some service providers said, here's technology, use it at your own risk. Or even in some instances where it's involved AI, here is technology that you, the law firm, needs to train up and then use at your own risk. And our approach is to say, we will train the technology. That's literally why you're paying us. That's our job. And we will provide insurance behind the technologies so you can rely on it. So that is one role of insurance. I view it pretty critical. Moving away from PI insurance, it's kind of towards title insurance or legal indemnity insurance. It's perhaps still rarefied or niche area of the insurance industry, which is commonly used today where there is a particular defect with a property to solve that defect. So maybe there's some missing documents or restrictive covenant over a property that need to be insured in order for a lender to be happy to lend on a property. Now, in the US, title insurance is used on every single transaction, and no lender would lend against any property without it being wrapped by insurance. Now, there are good systemic reasons for that. In the US, there's no central land registry, but in the UK, it's used on a kind of exception basis for specific risks. Now, what is interesting now is that there are pockets of the UK property market where title insurance is already well understood and used instead of due diligence, or instead of like full detailed diligence. So, for example, in lots of remortgage work or in bridge lending, it's very common just to do a kind of more high level diligence review and wrap that with an insurance product. It makes sense given the commensurate level of risk and the kind of the needs of the transaction. It has not moved into mainstream sale and purchase conveyancing. What we are enabling and proposing is that technology now is able to do more of the conveyancer's workflow than ever before in terms of reviewing documents, checking risks, identifying issues, helping them to raise inquiries. So the conjunction of technology and insurance could allow entire kind of work stream to be fully automated. So the proposition that we're working towards is a technology product that automates title check, if you like, backed by and wrapped with insurance so that both law firms can fully rely on it. It also provides comfort to the law firm and their client that all bases, all issues are covered through the kind of wrapper title insurance.
One of the pushbacks around technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, is this idea that we're in some way dumbing down conveyancing, that we are reducing the role of the practitioner. Are we dumbing down the role of the conveyancer, or should we view this more as an enabling piece?
I don't think that the fact that a machine can now, will do in the future certain tasks is necessarily dumbing down, given the sophistication of these systems. Large language models from OpenAI, the generative AI, has been consistently tested against a student's performance in what they call the multi-state bar exam, and recently has started to outperform most students who sit that multi-state bar exam. That's the US bar exam. So the first point is that these systems, and this is the worst they're ever going to be, right? They're very sophisticated. So I appreciate that's a student, not an experienced conveyancer of 20 years, but these systems are very, very sophisticated and they're only going to improve. So I don't think that necessarily handing a task over to technology is dumbing down on that basis. But also, it's nothing new. We've frequently handed parts of the conveyancing process over to either to systems or to lower cost resource centers or offshoring. So in order to make conveyancing efficient and profitable, that's been something necessary. I appreciate in saying this that we are focused on a particularly kind of legal, if you like, part of the process, right? Reviewing documents and identifying issues and reporting on risks. And there may be other technology that feels more focused on kind of not less legal in inverted commas work. So I think I can only really fully answer the question through my own recent experience of buying a flat. In my home purchase, my first purchase, I would not have wanted to do it without a conveyancing lawyer there to guide me. I deeply appreciated having my lawyer to talk to about concerns and tactics in my negotiation, and therefore I needed someone who knew what they were talking about, who had deep experience of transactions, and who would know how to deal with particular issues that arose in my particular case. Honestly, I didn't care who read through the documents or who compiled my report. And that, I think, is the crux of what we're saying. Technology is an enabler. It can and relinquish certain tasks from conveyancers. And I don't think any or many conveyancers would be devastated to think of a future in which they don't have to wade through kind of turgid leases, for example. But let's be completely clear, we're not talking about replacing lawyers. So as per my example, lawyers are trusted advisors in any type of property transaction. And I don't see that going anywhere.
I think, and I've said this to a few people, I think the realization here is that there's almost a new role that conveyancers play in the transaction that we can't continue to push back against technology. We have to embrace it. But by extension, that means that the role changes slightly, that, as you say, they become much more of a trusted advisor. I described it as a coordinative role whereby you're bringing information in from all sorts of different places and effectively pulling it together to enable the transaction. That feels like the direction of travel. Is that your view?
I think a coordinator is a really nice way of putting it. But I don't think it's just managing a process. The real value add, and I've seen this in both residential law and doing stuff in corporate law with Orbital Witness. The real value add is someone who's can provide historic context. They've seen a number of transactions. They've seen different types of causes. They've seen things play out, and they can provide advice, reassurance, guidance where necessary. That's what I think Conveyancer and already provides now, but doesn't have an awful lot of time to do so. And in the future, we'll have more time to spend on that kind of advisory role, and we'll be spending less time on perhaps more mundane tasks or just time-consuming tasks that at the end of the day, the end consumer, like the home buyer, doesn't really value.
It almost doesn't do justice to chat about artificial intelligence for such a short period of time on the podcast. And as we've alluded to, we could talk about this for an awful lot longer. But it's been really interesting to hear about your experience and the work that you're doing in this space, Ed. And I guess reassuring that you don't see that this is replacing the conveyancer. It doesn't replace that role. And I think there is a mindset change that needs to happen around it, enhancing the role, which will take time, naturally. Ed, it's been a really interesting discussion. I really appreciate you joining the podcast and sharing your insight today. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for having me. I've appreciated the discussion.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Ed. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.